Welcome to State of Reform's virtual leadership series with some of healthcare's most thoughtful leaders. And now, the host of State of Reform, DJ Wilson.
We're really pleased to have join us now from Washington, D.C., Senator Mitt Romney. Senator, thanks for making time to be with us. We've got you. You're still on mute there, sir. It was one of the ongoing challenges of our time. There we go.
There we go. All right. Hi, DJ. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate you making time. Let me just say first, I'm sure some people say this to you, and I'm sure that amount is still not enough. Thank you, as one American, for your leadership and your statesmanship throughout a very polarizing time in our country. So it's good to know Mitt Romney is in the Senate these days, at least in one person's view. And so let me ask you about what it is like as a person, as an individual, somebody who, you've been through all sorts of crucible events in Massachusetts, on the national campaign trail, in Utah, and now during our most polarized time in some memory. What is it like being a U.S. Senator today in 2020?
Well, the good news is that senators get along on a personal basis. People are very collegial. We go to each other's homes for dinner and social events, but we are very, very far apart politically. Our views on policy are diametrically opposed. It's very different, even than what it was like in the state of Massachusetts, where I was a Republican governor with a legislature that was overwhelmingly Democrat. We get a lot of stuff done. We work together pretty collaboratively. I didn't criticize the Democratic leadership, and after a while they caught the message. They didn't criticize me. It was a very effective setting. What's happening in Washington is very, very different, in part because the two political parties have moved further and further to the wings of their party. If you will, the small vocal portion of the respective parties is having more and more influence, and the people who are in Washington want to win their primaries. They're more concerned about winning their primary in many respects than they are winning the general election, because their states are either safe Republican or safe Democrat. And so you're seeing Washington become more polarized from a policy standpoint, if not from a personal standpoint. And that makes it very difficult to basically enact any legislation, because if one extreme wing or the other opposes, why that will lock in concrete any progress that might otherwise be made.
What is how wide? I know you're serving your first term in the Senate, but how wide is the scope of the Republican caucus these days? When you have your caucus lunches, it feels like there's quite a breadth of political opinion about the news of the day. For whatever one thinks of Mitch McConnell, it must be very difficult to hold the caucus together. Give us some sense of what that process is like, and how, as a caucus, the Senate Republicans are able to coalesce and move legislation forward.
Well, I'll begin by just noting something about Senator Mitch McConnell. Which is, he is not an arm twister. He does not come in and browbeat you and say, I need you on this vote. You better be with me on this. That just doesn't happen. He listens to what people have to say. He tries to get people to talk to one another if there are disagreements, but he does not try to direct our votes or to tell us we need to get in line. And as a matter of fact, if you find that you're one out of the entire 53 that disagrees with the rest of the group, he doesn't try and embarrass you. He respects your point of view. It's very, very, very interesting. He's very different than I had imagined in that regard. He's not the old LBJ arm twisting type of leader. In terms of the diversity within our caucus, yeah, there are a number who are, I'll call them more populist oriented, who are very much in President Trump's lane and support his approach to politics. I think that's probably a small share of the Republican caucus in the Senate. But overwhelmingly, the group is going to go along because the president's the leader of our party, and we're not going to disagree with the president if there's a policy that we think is a good policy. by and large, we share a policy point of view, a series of principles that continue to define conservatism, I believe, as a caucus. And so we're able to come together as a caucus on a lot of things. Our challenge is more the other side of the aisle. and to get something to the Senate requires bipartisanship. It requires a 60 vote majority. And that means you have to have Republicans and Democrats come together. So you can almost always get Republicans, let's say of the 53, maybe 45 or 46 will vote together. So you've got enough if you can get a few Democrats, and it's getting the Democrats that's the hard part.
Do you think it's time to remove the filibuster, remove the requirement of vote for cloture to end filibuster, that maybe that has become anachronistic in the manner in which it's used, rather than proponents for removal argue that it was meant to be a tool for an individual to speak to his or her values, and it has become something of an anti-democratic tool to hold up action. What are your thoughts on this question, as I think it will become a topic perhaps in 2021?
Well, we had the opportunity to remove the 60 vote rule. We call it filibuster, but no one actually filibusters anymore. I haven't seen a filibuster since I've been here. I don't know when the last true filibuster was. It basically is a process, a rule in the Senate that it takes 60 votes for something to become a law. And that means that for something to become a law requires bipartisanship. It has to be something that enough people in both parties agree to for it to become a law. That's a very positive thing. Because if you think about it, if instead the laws in our country were going to change anytime one party or the other got the majority in the Senate, whether it's 51 votes or a 50 vote number with a vice president breaking the tie, well, you're going to have a dramatic change. So, for instance, you might have the corporate tax rate go from 22% today, and if we didn't have the filibuster, it might go to 40% tomorrow. Corporations can deal with bad news. Innovators can deal with bad news. What they can't deal with is uncertainty. And if you're going to have that range of uncertainty going, if you will, from guardrail to guardrail, depending on which party happens to be in power, why, that would be a very destabilizing feature. And that's why even when Republicans could have eliminated the 60 vote rule, because they had both the House and the White House and the Senate, we could have eliminated that rule. This was before my time, but did not choose to do so because we felt that would so severely change the nature of how government works. And I know the Democrats are talking about getting rid of the 60 vote rule, the filibuster, so to speak. But that would change Washington in a very dramatic way, and would make the parties have to respond even more to their extreme. And you would see us whipsawed as a nation, depending on which party happened to have the simple majority. So yeah, I believe on major pieces of legislation, it's a good thing to require bipartisanship, people in both parties coming together.
Let me ask about healthcare. It's been such a, we're still fighting the wars from the 2009-2010 series, congressional session, it feels like, and that we've not yet as a country fully moved on to something that is either more constructive, or we have not yet coalesced majorities that would take us in a different direction. What are your thoughts on where the state of play might be in 2021 for moving beyond, these conversations that seem to have been about a decade old in some cases?
I do believe that there will be a significant readjustment following the election. I don't know who's going to win. I do predict that President Trump will get reelected. I think there's enormous advantage to being the incumbent. I also think that Biden voters, who tend to be young, and minority voters are less inclined to vote. And so I look at the polls and say, I think President Trump's going to win. I think Republicans will keep the Senate, but it's going to be a very, very close race. And I don't have high confidence in what the outcome will be. But depending on who wins the election, why, you're going to see a pretty dramatic change in policy direction, or a series of progressive steps that I think will be impacting our healthcare system. I would note that there are a lot of things we're looking at that relate to healthcare that are being proposed and worked on a bipartisan basis. So, for instance, dealing with surprise billing is something where Republicans and Democrats have come together. The Health Committee, which deals with health, voted, I believe the vote was 22 to 3 in favor of a surprise billing approach, which says, for instance, that if a physician or a provider is involved in caring for someone who's otherwise insured and is in an insured setting, that out-of-network provider will receive a median in-network rate for their services. If they don't believe that's fair, they will be able to go to an arbitrator to argue for a different rate. And that's something which Republicans agreed to, Democrats agreed to, and I think will become law. I can't tell you when it's going to get passed. It could be part of the next COVID relief package. It could wait until the lame duck session. It could wait until the new Congress is sworn in. But I do believe that, for instance, that kind of change will happen on a bipartisan basis. I likewise believe that there will be progress on prescription drug pricing. The president has taken action in this regard through executive order. And the most dramatic thing he's done is said people can import drugs from other countries, number one. And number two, that pricing in the United States for drugs will be done on an international basis, meaning you'll not pay more in the US for a pharmaceutical product than you do in other developed countries. Those are pretty dramatic changes. I think those will be enacted into law following the election, if not before. So, and in part because I think Republicans and Democrats, enough will come together to turn that into law. So I think you're going to see some changes in healthcare, in surprise billing and pharmaceutical pricing that will be done on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah. Let me ask you, switch gears from health policy for a second, go back to sort of politics. I had the opportunity and the honor to interview former US Senator Slade Gorton, who was of course, a sitting senator in the last impeachment trial in 1999 of President Clinton. And he talked about sort of solemn experience in that it was not an honor in the traditional sense of a special uplifting experience, but an honor in terms of a privilege of being able to have a seat in a very challenging time for our democracy then. And he talked about that U.S. senators would be taking the same sort of solemn approach. I think we saw that really across the board in a bipartisan way for the most part. Walk us through what it was like to be one of 100 members sitting in trial of a president, regardless of the outcome and the politics and all of that good stuff, but just to be in the middle of that crucible event for our democracy. What was that like?
It was a very different and somber experience. It was one which I desperately hoped I would not have to experience. I hope that there would not be an impeachment of the president, and hated to see that conduct occurred that necessitated that. But as you can imagine, that having the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court come in and have each of us swear an oath, a different oath, by the way, than the oath that we swore when we became senators. When we became senators, we swore to defend the Constitution and so forth. But in this case, we became, if you will, Senate jurors. We were to determine the validity of charges that were being leveled against the president. And so it was a different approach, a different type of responsibility that we had, and a different responsibility that the Chief Justice had. And the seriousness of that occasion is not lost on us. This is the only time that I've been in the Senate that the entire Senate is sitting there, where we all sat for several days, many, many, many hours, and listened to testimony. Just being with all of my fellow senators was a different experience, and one which underscored the importance of what we were doing. We were told that if any one of us spoke or even carried on whispering conversations with the person next to us, that we would be escorted from the room and removed. The high seriousness of what we were involved with was not lost on me. And I think each senator looked at what they believed was the right thing to do and followed their conscience in the way it led them. That's what I did, and I trust that's what the others did as well.
Yeah, you have been a leader in terms of living your values in a lot of different ways. Talk to us. Let me sort of parenthetically add to this, maybe as preface. I get sometimes a little cynical, a little bit disappointed, and worried about the future of our republic. And I know it takes someone optimistic to serve in public service, and to get out of bed every day and do the hard work of representing Utahns and working in the Senate. I know it's a special job, but you still take a lot of slings and arrows to do that job. So talk to me about the optimism, the things that give you hope about where we are as a country. There's plenty of stuff to speak otherwise, but what are the things that you see in your job that we don't always get to see that really rejuvenate your hope and your optimism in America?
Well, the greatest source of my optimism is the people I have met, not just in my Senate campaign, but in the presidential campaign. Fundamentally, the heart of the American people is good. I think we are stronger as a nation when we have leaders that call on the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln described. I think when we're being pulled apart through divisiveness, why obviously that weakens us as a nation, which is, by the way, why Russia works so hard to try and make us divided. They realize that weakens us. But my confidence comes from the fact that we have so many things going for us, a very powerful and growing economy. We're the leading technology engine of the world, and we have fundamentally good people who have faith in things bigger than themselves. I recognize at the same time, we have many challenges that relate to our state alone, and I work on those, but then there are three major, if you will, cross-national issues that we're having a hard time dealing with. And they give me concern, as I'm sure you do. One is the emergence of China as a superpower, intent on becoming the world's leading power, intent on displacing the United States and removing freedom as we know it, and replacing freedom with authoritarianism. And they're succeeding. They're making progress, and we're slipping backward in that regard. As you look around the world and see the nations that are lining up with China versus those that are lining up with us. I mean, for instance, we got a group of nations to join in criticizing China for cracking down on freedom in Hong Kong. It was 50 some odd nations. Over 100 nations wrote letters supporting China for cracking down on Hong Kong. That would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. So that's challenge one. Challenge two, in my view, relates to our national debt. We have trillions and trillions in national debt. Our national debt exceeds the size of our economy. And that's a real concern. And it gets worse every year as we add another trillion to the debt. And we have not been able to tackle that in any meaningful way for a long, long time, frankly, since the days of Ronald Reagan. And the third area relates to our climate and the fact that we're seeing a warming of the climate, which results in wildfires and other terrible things and has potentially devastating impacts long-term. So these are three big issues that we're going to have to face. And I hope that we're going to have the kind of leadership in homes, in churches, in schools, in businesses, and even in Washington that can finally address some of these big challenges, as opposed to just dividing America on issues that are wedge issues, emotional issues, but frankly detract from some of the things we really need to make front and center.
So our audience here today, and when we post this interview on our website at stateofreform.com, our readers are often senior folks in healthcare. They're leading organizations and health policy leaders that may be leading committees in the legislature. And, we're all a little bit caught up to some degree, to varying degrees, in the general election here in our country, but everybody is going to be leading their organizations after Election Day as well, and well into the future. So what advice would you give those senior leaders and these policymakers, particularly at the legislative and local levels? What counsel would you give us all in terms of how to navigate this polarizing time in our politics, but where healthcare the sector continues to be important, not just as we get through the pandemic, but for the future of our country. What advice do you give us?
Well, a lot will depend on what happens on Election Day. I think that if President Trump were to be reelected, which I predict will occur, but not with a high degree of confidence, obviously. But were he to be reelected, I think people would expect more of the same. I don't think you would see dramatic changes in our healthcare system. I don't think Obamacare itself would be eliminated. I don't think people would lose their coverage. I don't think pre-existing conditions would be removed from insurability. You would see adjustments on a piecemeal basis, such as surprise billing or prescription drug pricing. There may be other reforms that come forward, but there would not be any dramatic shifts. If Vice President Biden were to be elected as president, and if the Democrats got the Senate as well, I think you'd see more significant change with regards to healthcare. I presume that there would be a greater degree of subsidy for those that go into Obamacare. I don't think Obamacare would be eliminated. I do not think Medicare for all would be put in place. I don't think Vice President Biden is interested in putting in place a one-size-fits-all federal healthcare system for the entire nation. But I do think it's likely that there would be a federal program installed, a federal insurance program that is akin to Medicare, and that individuals would have the option of signing up for a federal system. That would present some pretty dramatic challenges for those in the insurance industry. It may well have an impact on those in the provider world. So I would expect an election to have pretty significant impact if a Vice President Biden were elected with regards to the insurance industry and perhaps even for providers.
Well, Senator Romney, I know that you had been notified late last night that you had votes on the Senate floor here starting about 15 minutes ago, and that you stuck with us. And I really appreciate you making time and joining us for this conversation, sir. US Senator Mitt Romney, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, DJ. Sorry to leave you so soon, but you're right. I voted on one vote already. I rushed in here, and now I got to run back and vote on the next. So thanks so much. All the best to you and to your colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thanks for joining us in this virtual conversation and for your support of our work at State of Reform.